Well, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Kova, the governor of the Central Bank of Georgia, an old friend. Dear Kova, welcome back. Welcome back to the fund. You spent here more than 13 years, and you worked also in the Middle East and Central Asia department. You become governor in 2016, in fact, a moment where it was a challenging moment for Georgia. The economy started at the time to recover from the external shock that were stemming from economic slowdown and currency depreciation, and issues with major trading partners. In 2017, the authorities requested an IMF program, and the program had as an objective to strengthen macroeconomic financial stability and to advance in structural reforms. And I would say, thanks to the authorities' prudent policies and sound reform implementation, the reform is performing well. I would say one of the good programs, not only in MCD, but in the fund. Today, I would like to invite you to talk a bit about this experience and experience in managing monetary policy in this environment, and look at the issues, for example, like inflation targeting, and how this policy have served Georgia since its introduction in 2009. Under your stewardship, the central bank maintained a focus on inflation targeting and kept inflation expectations well anchored. Continuing, you are sharpening policy tools, and also, I think an important feature, you have improved communication, which is very important in managing monetary policy. And I would say the central bank, consistent with inflation targeting framework, stayed committed to the exchange rate regime that is serving well your economy and implementing reforms to reduce dollarization, which is one of the key problems that many countries face, not only in the region, but in many other parts of the globe. Without any further ado, I would like to ask you to have a short, I would say, a commentary on how you see your experience in conducting your job as central bank governor and managing the monetary policy. And I'll have a few questions to ask you after that.
Thank you, Jihad, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to share experience of the National Bank of Georgia in terms of inflation targeting. Inflation targeting in Georgia started back in 2009, and when there was a time it was realized that monetary targeting which was used was not yielding the results which was desired. When the relationship between monetary aggregates and inflation diverted, and while monetary targets have been achieved, inflation target was not achieved. And naturally, the question was that we cannot continue like that, we have to do something else. And this was a time when inflation targeting was getting more and more accepted. Given that one cannot control together exchange rate and interest rate, the first question which came, and I guess I'll be talking more about it in my conversation today, was exchange rate. What to do with exchange rate? Because exchange rate was quite heavily managed by the time. And if you also look from impossible trilemma considerations, Georgia wanted to have active monetary policy. Georgia wanted to not to have capital control, so exchange rate could have been fixed. And it started with focusing on restructuring of the foreign exchange market. And foreign exchange market was moved to Bloomberg. And trading of foreign exchange became much more efficient. On average, National Bank of Georgia would intervene out of 22 working days 17 times in foreign exchange market, and then gradually declined And since foreign exchange flexibility was exercised, predictability of short-term foreign exchange became less and less possible to do. And then National Bank of Georgia was intervening less and less. And second area which was done was to start working on management of liquidity of commercial banks, because efficient liquidity management is absolutely important for monetary policy conduction and in order to transmit monetary policy through its channels. And National Bank of Georgia started to provide so-called refinancing rates with the desired monetary policy rate. And in the beginning, commercial banks were not very, they did not have much trust in this, but over the time, trust was built, and then commercial banks started to use it more and more actively. But with all this, it was necessary to build up some capacity. Without without technical skills of the staff, one cannot make projections, one cannot gain credibility or how to do monetary policy. And I have to say that the IMF staff contributed a lot to this, and there were trainings by research department, by IMF Institute, and Georgia we started to use FPAS program, which was very important to deliver the results which we had. And if you look at Georgia's experience today, after about 9 years of experience of having inflation targeting in Georgia, on average inflation has been about 3.4% since the introduction of inflation targeting. And we have been exploring more and more in what can be done to strengthen inflation targeting with floating flexible exchange rate in the country. But you mentioned in your question that when I came to the office, so there was sort of difficult time. And difficult time from the point of view that the taste which came at the time, it was 2014, 2015, was a depreciation of Georgian currency because of combination of factors, because Fed was exiting its expansionary policy, there was a fall in oil prices, and remittances were reduced in Georgia, and exchange rate came under a big pressure. And what was necessary by the time, my thinking as a policymaker was to think what needs to be done in this situation, what's the right way. First thing which, together with my team, I decided is to increase communication. Communication definitely has been the case in the National Bank of Georgia before, but there was no regular communication. So, for example, if governor would make appearance, it would mean that something was happening, and by itself, it was already perceived as something negative. So we have 8 monetary policy meetings per year, and in 4 times, the monetary policy committee meeting is followed by my briefing, and I call it briefings without time limit, which means that I give time to media, to experts, to give me as many questions as they want, and I explain in details what we did, what were the contributing factors, either higher than target inflation or lower than target inflation, what we think about the future. In addition to that, Deputy Governor also meets experts to explain all the details of our policy actions. The briefings which I mentioned, they are broadcasted on Facebook, and the people can also ask questions through Facebook. But it was just the beginning. What we did next, Jihad, we also started to have monetary policy meetings in the regions. This we borrowed from the Czech National Bank, because we are always looking at experience of other countries. Because in regions, actually, there is not much understanding what the central bank is doing and what's the aim of monetary policy of the National Bank of Georgia. And our main mandate is low and stable inflation, to maintain low and stable inflation in the country. And we would meet academia, we would meet representatives of business, financial sector. We wanted to understand, we want to hear from them how they perceive the situation, what they have expecting from us, in which direction we had to work. And one more thing which we did, I think, in terms of communication, was we joined the number of central banks, and if I'm not mistaken, now this shortlist consists of 11 central banks, when we started publication of forward-looking monetary policy rate. Mm-hmm. And most central banks consider it sort of a risky decision, because what if it does not realize is what situation changes, and then, well, it means that the credibility of the central bank will be lost. But we thought that it was necessary. And in fact, the result was quite good, and we were very happy with this, because what we noticed that we started publication of interest rate projection in May, and in about 1 month we saw that Treasury bill yield declined by 3 percentage points and normalized after this, which means that we already had some credibility. The public and agents, economic agents, were understanding well us. And one more sort of test for us, actually for me as well, when before monetary policy committee meetings there are some expert reviews or media reviews, they actually are guessing quite well what our decision will be, because they look at the situation and they are quite close in most cases when our decision is made.
Thank you very much, Kova, for this, I would say, nice overview, and that could be a nice case study. Let me go in some of the issues that you have, or keywords that you mentioned: trust, anchoring confidence, and also how to build credibility over time. The importance of some of the technical aspects, communication or market organization. When you felt that the trust is there, what makes you usually in dealing with both the financial community and, I would say, with the people at large, made you feel that now we are at a point where we have reached credibility with our main stakeholders? How you can measure it?
I think we can measure it, first of all, with the result which we have about inflation, and we have been managing it quite well. This is one. Financial stability has been in check, and we have had quite good results in terms of commercial banks, earnings, capitalization, liquidity. At the same time, economy was growing well, because even in that difficult period of time, and I hope we will talk about it, when there was a very large exchange rate depreciation, different from other countries which tried to defend the exchange rate, and Georgia did not defend the exchange rate, we saw that all these quite painful actions, because I think you will agree that not defending exchange rate in this difficult situation is very unpopular. We saw that all this works. First of all, in 2014-15, Georgia grew by about 2.9 percentage point, real economy on average, while in our partner countries and trade partner countries, growth was close to 1.4%, and there were cases when there was a negative growth as well. And then we saw that whatever we have been sort of aiming for, that there is an adjustment in current account through this shock absorption of foreign exchange rate, then came to the economy back through increasing exports. And now export is contributing greatly to the growth of the economy. So these were tangible results. And also, if we are talking about tangible results, there is one more thing. What we saw in terms of de-dollarization, we saw that for the last 2 years, because dollarization of both deposits and loans in Georgian banking sector declined by 10 percentage points. And usually the dollarization is very sort of long-term project. It does not come that easily. But I have to say that we have been, even ourselves have been a bit surprised by the speed of reduction in the dollarization. I remember one question I was asked in Bali. I think other governors were also asked, what does wake you up at night? And I didn't think much. I said that it's dollarization. It's high dollarization in the country where we have a floating exchange rate. And I think fear of floating.
Policymakers don't wake you at night.
No,
how you manage?
No.
How you manage in a situation where there is pressure in the markets? Because many central bank governors have the same dilemma. Whenever they move into a flexible exchange rate, sometimes markets are tense. And how you manage the pressure from I would say, the political part of the government? How you keep independence during those moments?
Actually, I will start from your last word, because high dollarization is quite risky, because adjustment in exchange rate can have redistribution, wealth redistribution impact in the society. And this means that central bank can become political player. And this is very dangerous. And if that's the case, then central bank may risk to lose its independence. So the way we have been approaching is to explain, to talk about it, to explain what are the benefits of not doing something which will be sort of beneficial in the short period of time, but later it will require even much more and much more painful adjustment for the economy and for the employment, for the well-being of population. And some examples from our neighbor countries also showed that that was the case. But just talking about is not enough. It needs to be done, because if you don't do this, then it means that whatever we are talking about does not mean anything. In terms of the pressure, I have to say that the National Bank of Georgia, by legislation, enjoys quite a good independence, and the tool I'm talking about, communication, helped us a lot. Because, in fact, I mean...
You communicate with whom? With the market?
We communicate with investors, with everybody. We communicate with universities. We communicate with population. I told you that we go to regions. We communicate with parliamentarians. We communicate with the government. We, for example, I also started to have like 4 minutes recording in every quarter after the issuance of monetary policy report. Then in a popular words, I explain what's the situation in the country with inflation, with other developments, and it's also on a website, on a YouTube. So we want to reach as many layers of population as possible. And exams, we also give exams. But then we gained some time, because by that time it was difficult to show, because of course import did not adjust immediately and exports did not start to grow immediately. But now we have more time, so we can show that while other economies actually suffered quite a lot, Georgian economy still grew. And now we are benefiting from this. Interest rates started to decline, and the spreads are declining. Now there are more tangible numbers to show to the population, and it makes our case even stronger.
What in the Georgian experience is relevant to countries in the region who are also have moved to a flexible exchange rate regime?
I think while considering this, several things need to be taken into account. First, there should be a good understanding what is inflation targeting. Why is it good? Why is it used by many countries? And intellectual and technical capacity of organization is very important. The next one, as I mentioned, liquidity management. Without this, it's not possible. And foreign exchange flexibility. If one cannot say no, and if one wants to have a fixed exchange rate, then most likely it's not going to succeed, and it's not worth undertaking this. And whether the organization is ready to communicate and to make agreement over this. Because otherwise, if there is no support, then it will be quite difficult. Dealing with all these things together most likely it will be difficult, but there should be sequencing of policies. Without sequence, you cannot start everything together. There should be some preconditions in the economy.
And how you anchor this in the long term? Because it's an evolving process, and there is always changes both international markets as well as also your own market. How you keep the pace of reforms?
I think the credibility which I mentioned, which we gained, also paves the way to the long-run credibility of our policies. What we do, we never stop. We try to explore new opportunities. What are the new instruments? What are the countries, other countries are doing, which we have not done and which have been good? We have been looking at experience of many countries, not only in our region, but in Latin America, in Asian countries. We are adding to our basket of instruments, new instruments. For example, recently we started options of foreign exchange based on the experience of, quite a good experience of Mexico and Colombia. They had very good experience with this, and now it's gaining more and more support. We are buying quite a lot of foreign exchange through this way. And we are working on other directions. We are working on, we already have completed the law on derivatives because we want to, capital market is underdeveloped in Georgia at this point, and we want to develop capital market even more. So we are trying to see the big picture, and we want to see what is being done in this direction. And this is also learning by doing from our side. We are testing several areas, and once it shows the good results, then we explore it more, and we and then we start implementation.
In an economy where you have a relatively high concentration in banking, is it something that helps or disserves the management of flexible exchange rate and inflation targeting and the good conduct of the monetary policy? I
think actually one group which I have not mentioned is commercial banks and financial sector, because we work quite a lot with commercial banks. How our instruments work, what are the benefits of these instruments, why they can save a lot of cost by liquidity management, what are these foreign exchange put options, for example, or any other instruments we want to use. You rightly mentioned that we have a high concentration in Georgian banking system, but in fact they themselves see the benefit of the good management. The fact that the Georgian banking system has been attracting quite easily the capital from abroad is a demonstration that there is a trust in commercial banks, but there is also trust in monetary authorities of Georgia. So banks are quite well tuned to our reforms. They understand very well what we are doing, and in case there is we need to do more, we are doing much more. And also the fact that for the last year Georgia has been upgraded by 2 rating. Sovereign rating was also updated by 2 rating agencies for the first time for the last 8 years, if I'm not mistaken, also shows that the policies which we have been conducting are yielding quite a good results, and there is a credibility and trust to whatever we are doing.
Kობა, my last question to you. The fund is very much involved, and both through the program as well as also in terms of technical assistance. How do you see this level of cooperation? Is it useful? Do you think, especially for someone who was in both sides? By the way, where it's easier to be in the fund side or in the government side or in central bank side?
Okay, I will start with the easy question. Being on a fund side was easier,
of course,
because one needs to be there to understand what it means and all the pressures we are talking about. By the way, I have been on another side before as well. I was working for the government. I was deputy finance minister and deputy state minister, but both sides said it has its challenges, let's put it this way. In terms of cooperation with the fund, I already mentioned that whatever fund did for the National Bank of Georgia and for other Georgian institutions as well to develop capacity is just very, very important. Without this, it won't be possible to achieve results what we have. I think what the fund can do in this direction, and fund is already doing in this direction, is to use this knowledge across the countries. For example, our staff of the National Bank of Georgia now is more and more, and I'm receiving quite a lot of requests from the fund departments to use them in technical missions, which is also demonstrations that whatever investment was put in the National Bank of Georgia, then it's giving it back. So I think that it should continue, this technical assistance. What I mentioned was research department, IMF Institute, MCM, and this will be, again, for the benefits not only for these countries, but for other countries as well. Because on our side, we will share also practical experience, how difficult it is, how is hands-on experience with this.
Governor, thank you very much. I think it was an excellent and very interesting overview about one interesting case. Definitely credibility, confidence, and commitment to reform paid. And also it requires some capacity development, technical skills, communication are also, although they are technical, but they are very effective. Thank you very much for taking the time this morning, and we will see each other.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation again.